From censored files to clear evidence, this is Redacted Realms.
Saddam Hussein, the savior of Vietnam in the early post-war years. Saddam Hussein, a highly controversial figure on the international stage, was once considered a thorn in the side by the United States. On December 13, 2003, he was captured by the U.S. military in Operation Red Dawn. Just 3 years later, on December 30, 2006, the new Iraqi government executed him. However, regardless of his domestic and foreign policy mistakes, or how he was accused in relation to the Iraqi people, as Mrs. Nguyen Thi Binh, former vice president of Vietnam, wrote in her memoirs, "For Vietnam, we cannot forget the valuable assistance he provided to the country during the difficult post-war years." So, how did Saddam Hussein help Vietnam? Let's explore with D2T. During the war years, Vietnam received assistance from many countries, including Iraq. Standing out as one of the most enthusiastic and dedicated supporters, Iraq's support included both spiritual and material aspects, stemming from genuine affection for Vietnam without any attached conditions. In 1973, while South Vietnam was focusing all its efforts on the war, the Provisional Revolutionary Government of the Republic of South Vietnam decided to open an embassy. At that time, due to the war, financial capacity was very limited. The Iraqi government generously funded all embassy activities, from the headquarters, vehicles to a cash amount for daily expenses. Notably, on the opening day of the embassy in the capital Baghdad, President Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr personally gifted a luxurious Citroen car. Moreover, support for Vietnam spread widely among the Iraqi people. Mass organizations such as the Iraqi Peace and Solidarity Committee, the Women's Association, and the Youth Association actively donated money, clothes, blankets, and many other essential items to send to Vietnam. By 1971, Mrs. Nguyen Thi Binh, then head of the Provisional Government's negotiation delegation, at the Paris Conference, visited Iraq and was welcomed as a hero. Iraqi people crowded the streets, waving flags and flowers to greet her. In 1975, after the liberation of the South and national reunification, Vietnam faced numerous difficulties in reconstruction. Saigon City, having just emerged from war, had to confront an exhausted economy and enormous resource challenges. At this time, seeking international support, especially in the energy sector, became a crucial task to meet the country's development needs. In October 1975, Mrs. Nguyen Thi Binh, then one of Vietnam's key leaders, made an official visit to Iraq with a mission of persuading the Iraqi government to provide oil support. This was not an easy task, as although Iraq always expressed strong support for Vietnam, when it came to specific economic matters, they also had to carefully consider their own interests. In a meeting with the vice chairman of the Iraqi Revolutionary Command Council, then Saddam Hussein, Mrs. Binh presented the difficulties Vietnam was facing. In response, Saddam Hussein unhesitatingly declared the decision to give Vietnam 400,000 tons as a victory present for the people of the South. Simultaneously, he committed to lending Vietnam an additional 1.5 million tons of oil under extremely. This generosity made Mrs. Binh confirm the information with the interpreter to ensure she hadn't misheard. Not stopping there, Iraq continued to show support when the Deputy Foreign Minister of North Vietnam, Mr. Nguyen Thi Binh, visited Iraq around this. Specifically, Saddam Hussein decided to lend North Vietnam an additional 2 million tons of oil interest-free. However, his assistance did not end there. After national reunification in 1976, Vietnam gradually began opening up to foreign cooperation, especially in the field of oil and gas exploration and exploitation. However, with limited experience in negotiating and signing international contracts, Vietnam is facing many major challenges. The Iraqi government sent top legal and petroleum experts to assist, pointing out issues to be aware of to avoid disadvantages when doing business with foreign oil companies. However, by 1976, financial challenges once again became a heavy burden for Vietnam. According to the previous loan agreement with Iraq, Vietnam was due to pay the first installment of the debt, but the country was still mired in mounting difficulties. With war wounds not yet healed, Vietnam had to face 2 new wars: defending the southwestern border against Pol Pot's forces and helping the Cambodian people escape genocide, while also resisting the invasion war from China at the northern border. We could not repay the debt to Iraq as agreed. That year, Prime Minister Van Dam visited Iraq. However, a special, limited-kind decision in the bilateral relations was made. The Iraqi government, under the leadership of President Saddam Hussein, decided to lend Vietnam an additional $100 million to pay the debt to Iraq itself. In the following years, Vietnam continued to face prolonged economic difficulties. In this context, repaying the debt to Iraq became a thorny issue. To alleviate financial pressure, the Vietnamese government proposed a debt deferral solution, combining repayment with goods and labor, while also using part of the debt for reinvestment in projects in Vietnam. Notably, even though Iraq was also facing a severe crisis due to the prolonged war with Iran in the 1980s, the Iraqi government still approved Vietnam's proposal. Goods such as rice, tea, clothing, and some other products from Vietnam were exported to Iraq to offset part of the debt. Additionally, thousands of Vietnamese workers went to Iraq to work in various fields. Specifically, they repaid the debt by deducting half of their salaries to pay to the host country, while the other half was sent home to help their family. Although aware that having Vietnamese workers deduct salaries to repay debt was not an ideal solution, the Iraqi side still agreed. After all, this approach helped Vietnam repay part of the debt, while also helping the workers' families improve their lives. Currently, projects such as the Hadiyah hydroelectric dam, about 100 kilometers from the capital Baghdad, and the Anbardis Dam in Mosul are exemplary works of Vietnam-Iraq friendship still in use. Not stopping there, joint ventures like rice milling and Hindo or Phu Tha tea production, named after the combination of Phu Tho and Baghdad, are still operating effectively. By 2002, Ms. Bin requested government permission to visit Iraq, citing her upcoming retirement and wanting to meet Mr. Saddam Hussein before retiring to discuss this unpaid debt. However, the context of the visit was quite complex. Vietnam had just signed the bilateral trade agreement, BTA, with it, marking an important step in improving Vietnam-US relations. At the same time, Iraq was facing increasing pressure from the US, with escalating political tensions. In that situation, Ms. Bin's visit risked being seen as a sensitive action that could affect the cooperation process between Vietnam and the U.S. Ultimately, the decision was made, and Ms. Bin and the government delegation set off. As a result, after the visit, Vietnam-US relations were not negative. On the contrary, the BTA continued to be implemented normally. The special aspect of the visit was that after 22 years of returning to Iraq, Ms. Bin was still a distinguished guest. Upon arriving in Iraq, she was warmly received by President Saddam at the Anfor Palace near Bada International Airport. Unfortunately, this palace was later turned into a prison, where Saddam Hussein was detained, and the leaders of the former government when the U.S. entered Iraq in 2003. At the meeting, Ms. Bin sincerely and emotionally shared about the oil debt from 1975. She expressed that, despite efforts over nearly 3 decades, Vietnam still hadn't fully repaid this debt. In her role as someone who directly signed and witnessed Iraq's support during the country's most difficult times, she felt tormented that she was about to retire without completing that responsibility. Right then, Sadat immediately said, hoping she would retire peacefully, maintain her health and not worry about anything. From this moment on, there is no debt between us anymore. Ms. Bin once again couldn't believe her ears. Saddam continued, I don't know the specific amount Vietnam still owes Iraq. At 5 p.m. today, I will send Vice President Tajuddin Ramadan to the residence where you're staying to sign an agreement, canceling this entire debt. True to his word, at 5 p.m. that day, Vice President Tajuddin Ramadan, along with some Iraqi government officials, brought a pre-typed agreement document. The agreement was brief, containing only the main content. S directive, from today all of Vietnam. And this amount will be converted into investment capital for joint projects between the two countries in Vietnam. The signing ceremony wasn't grand, without camera lights, but took place on a small table, simply in the living room of the residence Saddam provided for Ms. Bin during her visit to Iraq. After completion, Vice President Ramadan even personally drove Ms. Bin to tour Baghdad city. The meaning of this debt cancellation decision goes beyond economic numbers. At that time, Iraq was also suffering heavy pressure from international sanctions and isolation on the global political stage. Despite the difficulties, the Iraqi government, under President Saddam Hussein's leadership, still decided to support Vietnam. Thus, it can be seen, although Saddam Hussein's personal history remains controversial with shadows in his political career. For Vietnam, he is still remembered as a great friend who helped when the country needed it most. What do you think about him? Please leave comments below for Did to Know. Thank you for listening. Goodbye and see you again. Subscribe to the Gia Nico channel to not miss exciting videos.
If this file opened your eyes, subscribe and open the next case.